The major protest era began with the Civil Rights Movement during the 1950s and the early 1960s. The Civil Rights Movement fought to the long-standing political, social, economic, and legal practices that discriminated against the black community, and it would later influence movements for social change both by inspiring Americans to fight for changes and by using methods of direct action such as protest marches and rallies. And another movement was the gay rights movement. In the 1960s, laws in most states prohibited homosexual acts. State and federal laws often made it illegal for gay men and lesbians to work for the government, and private employers routinely discriminated against them. The armed forces did not allow gay men or lesbians to serve either, and most Americans felt it was acceptable to scorn and ridiculous and even physically harasses homosexuals. As a result, gay Americans usually hid their sexual preferences. By 1973, some 800 gay organizations existed. Most were based in big cities and non-university campuses. Many simply existed as a safe and supportive environment for gay men and lesbians. But gay rights groups also lobbied local and state officials to pass non-discrimination statuses similar to those that were passed to protect women, blacks, and other minority groups. However, most Americans in the 1970s and in later decades did not believe that homosexuality was an acceptable lifestyle, often because of their religious beliefs. As a result, gay activists succeeded in winning special legal protection, similar to that won by blacks and women, has been limited. Still, the gay movement did succeed in their first goal. Millions of Americans now live openly as homosexuals. Their visibility in workspaces and in communities around the United States has decreased discriminatory practices.
African Americans had done many protests in order to gain their civil rights. One of those people were Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He gave public speeches about how African Americans were equal and shouldn't be discriminated. By doing this, many others followed in his footsteps and began to protest not having civil rights. After many years of peaceful and violent protests, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. This act outlawed discrimination in public places such as hotels and theaters. This also helped create the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, banning discrimination at jobs. Even after African Americans gained their civil rights, they still faced discrimination at jobs and in the public. In 1964, the SNCC organized a drive to help Southern African Americans to vote. This was called Freedom Summer. This brought Northern college students to Mississippi to work with SNCC organizers. Even though many African Americans were still mistreated and even killed, they were able to be a part of the voter registration rolls and gain their civil rights.
Fashion during the 1960s fluctuated extremely. During the early 1960s, fashion was conservative, black and white, restricted, and more classic in terms of design. In the mid-1960s, fashion started to become more interpretive and free. Lastly, late 1960s fashion turned into the exact opposite of the early 60s fashion. Late 60s fashion became known for bright swirly colors, long hair, peace signs, extremely short skirts, and tie-dye. There were many contrasting trends in the 1960s. Some were vintage house decor, cutouts, pop art, geometric shapes, black and white, bright colors, classic styles, and extreme patterns. As you can tell, the trends contrasted and fluctuated drastically.
With war going about all around them, people needed a way to escape from their lives, so they all turned to music. The 60s held a great evolution of several different genres and many different singers and groups that made an incredible decade. Rock and pop, two genres that shook everyone to get up and moving. It was led by groups such as the Beach Boys, who took over radios with their fun and energetic tunes. They reached number 1 4 times on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Don't forget about the British invasion, though, where the Fab Four Beatles came into light in the United States. and sold a whopping 800 million albums worldwide. But of course, known as the King of Rock, Elvis Presley was one of the most influential musicians in the 20th century. With the best moves and hair, he rocked stages everywhere. Rhythm and blues also had its mark in pop culture of the 60s, with singers such as Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin. They both had their own wonderful effect on rhythm and blues, and portrayed African Americans as greatly talented during the Civil Rights era. All in all, music of the 60s improved and developed, with new forms of each genre and a fusion of different cultures and people.
Movies and films. The top 5 movies of the 1960s were Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, The Magnificent Seven, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Psycho. And another that you may remember recently watching is To Kill a Mockingbird. Some big hit TV shows in the 60s were The Addams Family, The Avengers, The Andy Griffith Show, Batman the Series, The Brady Bunch, the original Hawaii Five-0, Star Trek, and Bewitched. CBS, NBC, and ABC were the most popular networks. The 1960s was known for many sitcoms and was very big with TV westerns.